Hello everyone. Before we start today's video, if you could all do me a solid and lightly tap the like button, perhaps share the video about and leave a comment. If you are not subscribed, subscribe as well. It would greatly help this channel. Thank you very much. Well, isn't this just fantastic? Captain's log, subject 220810.4. I genuinely didn't know that hoarding could lead to criminal proceedings until I, like literally everyone on this site, got recommended those hoarder TV show videos. They are quite the eye-opener. Hello everyone, welcome to the Halls of Injustice. Today we welcome inmate numbers, yes we have two of those today, 138.1 and 138.2 to the ISO cubes. They are a father and son, one being Cecil Burdett and the other being Philip Burdett. As we don't have mugshots for them, this will have to suffice. My apologies for that. Their crimes concern Julie Burdett. Julie Burdett is the daughter to Cecil Burdett, and her brother is Philip. For the crimes we're now going to go through, we need to understand a bit of context about the living arrangements of those three people. We also need to go back in time to January 2019, which was when Julie Burdett passed away. In 1998, Julie Burdett suffered from a disease similar to multiple sclerosis. This meant that she had to spend the remainder of her life in a wheelchair, which in turn made it very difficult for her to leave the home. As time went by, she required a carer, but as the family didn't have much in the way of resources, that care fell on the doorstep of her brother Philip, who received £60 a week as carer's allowance to look after her. And if it isn't obvious enough already, neither Philip nor Cecil did anything to actually care for her, which is where a lot of the issues arise. When she did pass away in January 2019, she weighed 4 stone 10 pounds, which is considerably lower than where the baseline is for average people. Granted, there may be circumstances where she might well have weighed near that anyway. It is unlikely. And even though Philip and Cecil could have asked for help to make this a lot easier, neither have actually made the effort to do so because it was against Julie's wishes to give her that kind of care. Julie Burdett had passed away from extreme ulcerations. When she was examined by an expert, they had noticed that they'd never seen such a severe level of pressure damage in their 40-year career, which indicates a level of neglect that stretches over decades. Over a number of weeks, while they themselves were the carer, neither the father nor the brother moved Julie, clean, or feed her. They did nothing to help her and she wasted away. Their actions led to her passing. Both denied the charge when they were arrested of manslaughter. Well, we're going to get to that because the trial part was quite fascinating. Timothy Craig QC, prosecutor, started the case by telling the jury, "What you're going to hear in this courtroom is going to be hard for you to forget. Ever, I should think. Parts of the evidence, at least at the start, are shocking, and I'm afraid they might cause you feelings of disgust and even revulsion. So from the start, it is important to understand why you have been brought from your normal lives in here, and why you have to examine some terrible facts. The reason you are here is because someone died, a woman who was called Julie Burdett. We, that is the prosecution, say that Julie's death was entirely avoidable, and that the fault for her death lies with these defendants. Our case is that Julie died from neglect, because these defendants, who were meant to care for her, did not care for her." Julie was then described as intelligent and articulate before her unfortunate contraction of an illness similar to multiple sclerosis. When detailing the alleged neglect, Timothy Craig told the jurors the failures were basic. They did not move Julie, they did not clean her, they did not feed her properly, and they did not call for medical or other help. The neglect you're going to be looking at was sustained over weeks, and parts of it were deliberate. For example, each defendant decided that they would not call medical or any other help for Julie. Ultimately, the result of this neglect was that Julie died. She died, I'm afraid, from dreadful injuries and surrounded by filth and squalor. In the home she shared with the defendants, her own father and her own brother, their neglect was bad enough to lead to an awful death. On the face of it, Julie could have been saved by something as simple as one phone call to any of the medical professionals who had been caring for her for years, or to neighbors who were willing to help, saying that Julie was in serious decline and that they were struggling to cope. The central allegation that we make is that their neglect led to Julie's death, and that the neglect was so exceptionally bad that it amounted to the crime of manslaughter. Timothy Cray went on to then describe what the paramedics found when they entered the home of Julie Burdett, with her being described as thin, frail, with no signs of life, and that Julie had been left in her room, wedged against a bed in a space where there was barely room to move, akin to that of a discarded hobby, perhaps, which is quite sad, sick, and disgraceful. On the 2nd of May 2022, Cecil Burdett, aged 93, was convicted of allowing the horrific death of Julie Burdett after initially being found not guilty of manslaughter. He was instead found guilty, though, of the lesser offense of allowing the death of a vulnerable adult. Julie's brother Philip, aged 59, was found guilty of gross negligence manslaughter. The prosecution had told Leicester Crown Court that it would have only taken one simple phone call to save her, to simply ask for help. And some people are a bit confused here as to whether or not it's entirely out of arrogance and pride that they refused to ask for help, or they simply did not care enough for her well-being. The latter seems equally likely to the former. Cecil Burdett had told the trial that he had no idea his daughter was dying, which no one believed. I wonder why. Prosecutors alleged that the defendants, who were described in court as extreme hoarders, left Julie to suffer dreadful injuries, surrounded by filth and squalor, for 2 weeks in January, and that only a few days before she had passed away, Julie had actually fallen from her bed. Cecil decided he did not want to move her nor ask for anyone to help because he was afraid of trying to and then dropping her, and not because he didn't want anyone to see the inside of his house and then call someone on him, which would have been preferable. But that said, if anyone has seen hoarders in action, you know they'll do anything to protect their hoard. They can't see beyond it, past it, or sense. Cecil also said he had not noticed the smells because of the excrement in the house. The smell of urine because of clutter on the bed that made it impossible for Julie to get to the restroom, adding that all three of us loved each other. I would have done anything for that girl. I think Philip and I did as much as we could to help Julie in this situation. He also described urging Julie to let him move some of the clutter from her bedroom and get her medical help. He said, I wanted to get help, but to do that, I'd have to go against her wishes. She was so determined that I wasn't to call for help and wasn't to move anything. I said, if you move these things, we can put you in the bed. She said, leave it, Dad. She wouldn't let me continue to discuss as to why. She said, promise me, Dad, that you won't let anyone into my bedroom other than you and Philip. That is what she said. Mr. Justice Pepperell told Cecil and Philip that he was going to adjourn the case and that should not indicate, imply, promise, or anything else as to the type of the sentence that will be passed, and that all options remain available to the court. My view on this is quite simple. Both of you left her there to rot. You made every excuse for why you couldn't do something, and not do the one good thing that would have helped her. That is the truth of the matter, and that tells me everything that we need to know about you two cretins. Now, when we get to the sentencing, it's quite fascinating, really, because Cecil Burdett wrote a letter to the court. Now, I found this quite fascinating, because while the jury were in retirement, the letter was written thanking the judge, the legal profession, and the court staff for the courteous and fair way which you had been treated. Cecil, that is. It had been accepted that Philip suffered from agoraphobia and depression, and that neither were equipped to deal with the needs of Julie Burdett. The judge also accepted that both Philip and Cecil had made a promise to not let anyone else care for Julie, and that although misguided, the judge accepted that they had convinced themselves it was in Julie's best interest to remain at home so that they could bury their heads in the sand. There is a lot more to it, by the way, but I think we should just get to the sentencing. Cecil Ralph Burdett was given a 2-year sentence, suspended for 2 years. I don't agree with that. And Philip Burdett was jailed for 3 years. Now, he was the primary caregiver. He should go to prison. Consider the additional context from the judge's own statement, though. They should have noticed the smells from necrotic tissue, as she was not only deteriorating, but the sores themselves were causing MRSA. It should be acknowledged that while many neighbours, family, friends and so on found Cecil Ralph Burdett to be warm, kind and considerate, law-abiding man who had worked as an electrician for 51 years, this is still gross negligence. Simple as that. No human being should live the last weeks of their life in the kind of agony that Julie had to endure because of ignorance on the parts of Ralph, Cecil Ralph that is, and Philip Burdett.